Welcome everybody to the AVERT Research Network webinar today. I'm delighted to see those of us who are joining, and I see that there are a number of participants who are still jumping online. As people would know, this is the fourth and final webinar in the AVERT post-symposium webinar series, where we've been able to take a deeper dive into some of the really fascinating issues that were covered in the International Research Symposium last November. And we are absolutely delighted today for the final in the series to have with us Professor Dr. Jan-Willem van Prooijen from the Netherlands, who is an expert in the relationship between conspiracy theory and extremism, amongst other things. Jan-Willem is a behavioral scientist who has received his PhD from Leiden University in 2002. Jan-Willem is Associate Professor of Social Psychology and Program Director of the Psychology Bachelor's Program at the Free University Amsterdam, a Senior Researcher at the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Crime and Law Enforcement, and an Endowed Professor of Radicalization, Extremism and Conspiracy Thinking in the Department of Criminal Law and Criminology at Maastricht University. Jan-Willem is interested in the dark side of human beings, particularly in the context of politics, law, and society. And his research has three main thematic pillars. First, conspiracy theories. Second, unethical behavior. And third, radical ideologies. He is a past president of the International Society for Justice Research from 2016 to 2018 and is widely published, including a recent book in 2018 on the psychology of conspiracy theories. Professor Van Prooijen also serves on a range of journal editorial boards and is a regular contributor to Dutch media. So we are both honored and delighted to have him presenting to us today. Jan-Willem will be speaking to us for about an hour, going through his presentation, and then we will have half an hour for a moderated Q&A session with Jan-Willem. As always, can I remind participants that we would like you to put your questions for Jan-Willem in the Q&A button, which appears at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to post questions during the presentation as they arise for you, but we will of course hold questions until Jan-Willem's presentation is finished. So with that, Jan-Willem, I would like to invite you to begin.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for this wonderful introduction. I'm going to share my screen with you. Let's see. Okay, so you should now be seeing my slides. If you don't, please let me know. I'll be talking about the relationship between believing conspiracy theories and extremism, and I think they are closely related construct, and I'll be mostly focusing on the processes that underlie these relations that make people radicalize as a function of conspiracy theories. But I would like to first start with introducing conspiracy theories a little bit. We've seen a lot of them lately. And what's really striking is you see them particularly connected to societal crisis events. So, for instance, with the pandemic, when many people started thinking it was made in a lab or a hoax. But also earlier in time, like 20 years ago when the 9/11 terrorist strikes happened, there were a lot of conspiracy theories about this. Some conspiracy theories are about ongoing crisis events, such as climate change, or sometimes when they emerge, economic crises. And nowadays, there was, of course, the war in Ukraine. And well, at least in the Netherlands, there were also a lot of conspiracy theories about that, such as that the media are lying and that the Russians are actually the good ones in the conflict. So, there's a lot of conspiracy theories around them. Let's also briefly define them. This is a really common definition of conspiracy theories, that they're explanatory beliefs involving multiple actors who join together in secret agreements to pursue hidden goals that are widely seen as malevolent. So, there's a couple of components there. It always is, a conspiracy theory always is something that's secret, something that we cannot see, and it's always something that's evil. Often they're about powerful and legitimate institutions, such as the government, secret service agencies, branches of industry. We had, of course, a lot of conspiracy theories about the pharmaceutical industry during COVID-19 and the vaccination campaign. But it's not only about powerful groups. It can also be about minority groups in society. There has been a lot of conspiracy theories about Muslims, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jewish people have been prevalent throughout the ages, really. That really traces back to medieval times. There were also a lot of conspiracy theories about Jewish people back then, which had a lot of consequences for these people. So there's really conspiracy theories about lots of possible groups. When I started my research on conspiracy theories, which was in 2008 or 2009, I think one of the most common remarks that I got was, isn't this a bit of a fringe phenomenon? But in recent years with the Trump election and also the COVID-19 pandemic, I think it's also became more, people started to recognize that this isn't just some fringe phenomenon. This is really widespread. These were results of nationally representative samples responding to the question, was COVID-19 planned in the United States or purposefully created in the lab? And these were the percentage of people saying it was true. So you see across the board, pretty high percentage. Actually, in Australia, it was this was actually apparently in May 2020 pretty high. They also ran it in my country. In my country, it was actually a lot lower. If you're now going to ask me why is that the case, I'm going to have to be brutally honest. My answer is going to be I honestly don't know. When I was invited to a Dutch radio program and I was confronted with these results, the journalist asked whether or not I was shocked that it was this high, and my reply was in light of international findings. I was actually surprised it was this low. But the point here is it's not a fringe phenomenon. It's really widespread across the population, across societies. These data only focus on Western societies, but there's also data from more Eastern societies where it's also quite a thing in the population, so to speak. Now, what's the link with extremism? Now, let me start out by saying that it's actually very easy to find anecdotes of extremists who were also conspiracy theorists. Here is a very old one, Maximilien de Robespierre, who was an extremist during the French Revolution. He took away a lot of procedural protection for people who were standing trial, and that made it easier to sentence people to death and to put them, to decapitate them underneath the guillotine. Here's a well-known quote by him. There are only two parties in France, the people and its enemies. We must exterminate those miserable villains who are eternally conspiring against the rights of man. We must exterminate all our enemies. Now, and I think here we can clearly see this conspiratorial worldview. They are conspiring, but there also are two people. There's a very evil and hostile group, and there's also a good group, but the hostile group is conspiring to make life worse for everyone. And I think that is also key, I think, to the relationship between conspiracy theories and extremism. The belief that there's this hostile group which does a lot of bad things, making it also legitimate to fight against that group using any means that is available. Now, this is of course a relatively old anecdote from a guy who lived, well, hundreds of years ago, but also present-day extremists also are conspiracy theorists. Anders Breivik was responsible for killing more than 70 people, young people, mostly young people in Norway. Before he pursued his actions and started his terrorist strikes, he posted this manifest on with over 1,500 pages on the internet, which was full of so-called Eurabia conspiracy theories, so conspiracy theories that left-wing political parties in Norway and also elsewhere in the European Union were conspiring with Muslim organizations to gradually Islamize Europe. So these were these far-right anti-Muslim conspiracy theories. Brenton Tarrant from New Zealand, who opened fire in 2 mosques in Christchurch in 2019, killing more than 50 people, was a big believer in the Great Replacement theory. So that's this theory that gradually there's a plot to gradually replace the white population of Western societies with immigrants. And quite likely this was a major inspiration for his actions. So I think that's also something that's that'll recur at other places of my talk. What you can really see is that most extremists, not all, but most extremists also tend to be conspiracy theorists, but not vice versa. Not all conspiracy theories necessarily are extremists. So what tells us that? I think that tells us that conspiracy theories can play a role in the process of radicalization. And it's that process that I'll be focusing on. There have been some more qualitative studies on extremist groups. This was a study that was published in 2010, a study that I really like. So what did they do? They looked at the speeches and documentation of over 50 extremist groups, some of them violent and of all possible ideological colors. So they looked at radical left-wing groups such as the Rote Armee faction, also responsible for, I think, over 30 killings in the 1970s, mostly in Germany. Far-right groups such as neo-Nazis, religious fundamentalist groups such as Al-Qaeda, but also groups that weren't so easy to classify, such as anti-technology groups. There were, for instance, in the 1980s, radical anti-computer groups that threw firebombs and these Molotov cocktails in computer centers because they were afraid of conspiracies for computers to take over the world. Now, what did they do? They read all their speeches and documentation and coded them for conspiracy theories and conspiratorial content. Now, these groups all want really, different things, have very different ideologies, but what did they have in common? And the answer was conspiracy theories, sometimes about different topics, such as, left-wing groups that was more about banks and big companies, of course, and right-wing groups that were more about minority groups, for instance, but still they were, quite conspiratorial. And there were also a couple of common themes that they all shared, such as the belief in one secret and hidden world government. That was conspiracy theories that you could see independent of ideological orientation. And their conclusion, which I think is a very interesting point, and that also matches my impression of these phenomena, is that conspiracy theories, they called it a radicalization multiplier. So that conspiracy theories don't necessarily always lead to radicalization, but they do exacerbate the dynamics underlying extremism, and thereby accelerating the process of radicalization and making people more radical, by portraying other groups as evil, by portraying other groups as dangerous, by legitimizing violence, and so on. According to Bartlett and Miller, there were 3 more specific processes. So they noted that conspiracy theories demonize outsiders. So through conspiracy theories, anyone who disagrees with your radical ideology can be, portrayed as evil as part of the conspiracy. They also enable extremist groups to discredit criticism of their group. That's what you, for instance, see among, Donald Trump could be a good example. Anytime he gets criticism from the media, it's fake news, right? Well, that's of course very easy. Then anytime someone criticizes you, that's just part of a conspiracy to undermine what you're doing. And also restricted by only looking at people who already were members of radical groups. So they only looked at radical groups, and some of them violent, them not violent, but they didn't really look at regular citizens before they radicalized. And I'm going to actually look at that. So what are the underlying processes that connect conspiracy theories to radicalization, and particularly that make regular citizens more extreme because of their belief in conspiracy theories. So in order to answer that question, let's first establish what conspiracy theories, conspiracy beliefs and extremism have in common. Now, at the beginning of the talk, I already said that conspiracy theories typically pop up in societal crisis situations. And the reason of that is most likely that crisis situations stimulate a range of negative emotions, such as anxiety and controllability. And these initiate this sense-making process, leading to conspiracy theories shortly after. But also these negative emotions, anxiety, uncontrollability, and uncertainty also are at the root of extremism, actually. So that is something that you can, again, let's also start with an anecdote. So this year I really felt we've hopped from one crisis to the next. From when we had Corona, now here in the Netherlands, the pandemic is, well, sort of over. There's no more restrictions, but now we have a different crisis here in Europe. What was interesting, and it was also a big thing at some point in the Dutch media, exactly those conspiracy believers well-known conspiracy believers who believed in Corona conspiracy theories, and were also member of radical groups. So they were also, they're now standing trial because they were also intimidating and harassing people at vaccination centers. They now also have been widely in the media for propagating conspiracy theories, taking the side of Putin in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So the same people who believed in these conspiracy theories and radicalized in that also believed in these conspiracy theories. Now, this is, I think, a well-known insight in conspiracy theory literature. That belief in one conspiracy theories makes people also more likely to believe in others. But I think it also says something about radicalization, about an increased tendency to more easily distrust other groups, to more easily see the government as evil, which can fuel radicalization. Now, how exactly are these? I'm just calling it, distress as an umbrella term. So distress as an umbrella term for anxiety, uncontrollability, and so forth. How is that related to conspiracy theories? This is our theory. So these distressed feelings, existential threats, crisis situations, install a need to make sense of that situation, and then they lead to conspiracy theories. If there is an antagonistic outgroup salient, if people can blame it on the actions of another group, such as a government, such as a minority group. So in other words, this need to make sense often implies scapegoating of groups that one didn't trust to begin with, such as the government, companies, scientists, or minority groups. And I think, this notion of this antagonistic outgroup is also key to radicalization. Now, how is distress theoretically associated with extremism? There's various theories suggesting that. I think the most well-known one is significance loss theory by ADHERING, who noted that significance loss is a key driver of extremism, also a form of distress. He defines it in terms of distress, humiliation, injustice, exclusion, and so forth. Now, and these extreme beliefs and actions help to restore a sense of significance by installing a sense that one matters and that one is deserving of respect. How does this work? How do we get this sense that we matter or are deserving of respect? By fighting or opposing a group that one perceives to be hostile and dangerous to the common interest. So again, here you see this notion of this hostile group. So in some conspiracy theories and extremism, I think theoretically have some common ground. They're both rooted in distress. They're all both rooted in the idea that due to this distress, people start becoming more suspicious and perceiving as more hostile groups that they perceive to be different. And groups that perceive to be different can be pretty much anything ranging from a government or other powerful groups to minority groups. So I think that's key to that link. Now, after having established that, I think that doesn't still answer the question how exactly conspiracy theories then facilitate radicalization. Because again, as I said earlier, yeah, most extremists do tend to be conspiracy theorists, but not vice versa. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists who aren't necessarily extremists. So that suggests that conspiracy theories come first. So yeah, due to this stress, people then embrace conspiracy theories, but how then does this facilitate radicalization? What explains this process? Now, in the remainder of my talk, I will be arguing for 4 complementary processes. I don't think it's these are the only 4 actually, but there are 4 that I can, say a lot about also with data. So yeah, first of all, I think conspiracy theories decrease people's adherence to rules and regulations. So the conspiracy theories make people more likely to act above the law. And I think that's also something that extremist groups do. But the thing is, with conspiracy thinking, you can already see that with acting above the law in ways that aren't necessarily part of extremism. So this is a study that I found really interesting, that conspiracy thinking predicts and also experimentally increases the willingness of people to engage in small forms of criminal behavior, such as filing false insurance claims. What is the reasoning behind it? What's the process behind it? Well, actually pretty simple. If the power holders up there are all seen as violating the law, violating the rules, and only serving their own self-interest, why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we then, reap the benefits of a little dishonesty? So this way, yeah, conspiracy theories can place people, as it were, above the law. Also, conspiracy theories are associated with deteriorated interpersonal relationships, and I think that's also important for extremism. Because recall, extremism is rooted in significance loss, and that's also what Kruglanski has said. Significance loss can be a collective thing, can be because your groups are treated unfairly, but it can also be part of your personal life because you feel excluded, because you're not really part of something, and that can make radical groups more that do accept you more appealing. So yeah, and we'll see how in the next few slides how conspiracy theories are associated with decreased trust in others, and also with rejection experiences. Now, I think the conflict between groups in society, this one may actually be the most key to my argument, because both extremism and conspiracy theories are all about perceiving other groups as hostile. Now, there's actually also a lot of evidence suggesting that conspiracy theories indeed are associated with perceiving conflict with groups. So if you believe in conspiracy theories and believe another group is hostile, then you're also more likely to be in conflict with that group. And political polarization. So people's ideological and political opinions, become more radical, become more rigid, and and that also I think can subsequently facilitate, further radicalization in these ideologies. So let's start with these are the 4 processes I'll be focusing on. Let's start with decreased adherence to rules and regulations. Now, these were photos taken in the Netherlands in March 2020, directly after the first lockdown started in the Netherlands. I don't know if there was something similar in Australia, but there was in the UK, which were in the Netherlands, over 20 of these telecommunication masts were put on fire, and the police has noted they were put on fire by anti-5G activist groups, and they were driven by conspiracy theories that 5G radiation was responsible for the corona pandemic. Now, this is actually also something, there's also some research by Dan Jolley who has shown that when people believe conspiracy theories, they are, less likely to respect property. So they are more in favor of destroying property, which is, of course, violating the law in an obvious way. So that's one way in which conspiracy theories can lead to decreased adherence to rules and regulations. I think a very interesting one is protest. During the Corona pandemic, there were a lot of protests, yeah, everywhere in the world, I would think, where people were protesting against yeah, the restrictive measures, the lockdowns, but also the vaccination regulation. There were a lot of protests against the Dutch policy to only allow people who were vaccinated in public places, for instance. Now, there were a lot of signs that this was associated with conspiracy theories, but it's also a bit too easy to say that protesting is associated with it goes hand in hand with conspiracy theories, because there's a lot of protesting that can take place in accordance with the rules, right? I mean, we're all sometimes unhappy with governmental policy, and also sometimes not always that happy with what the government does, but and that can be also a perfectly legitimate reason to protest. But there are various ways of protesting. You can protest in a peaceful or not so peaceful manner, or put more generally, you can protest in accordance with the law and follow the rules that the mayor of the town where you want to protest has set, and keep it peaceful. Or you can just go on social media and explain and express your discontent, or you can commit violence. And there's actually a few studies, and this is one of them, who has actually shown that conspiracy beliefs are negatively associated with what they call normative collective action. So yeah, peaceful protest according to the rules, but actually positively with non-normative, such as violent or illegal forms of collective action. So yeah, it's not necessarily the case that conspiracy beliefs predict increased protest. It specifically predict increased protest in a manner that violates the law. So I think that's quite an interesting point. Here are two examples. Well, of course, I'm sure you all know the footage of the storming of the Capitol after the Biden election, which was clearly driven by the belief that the elections were stolen by Biden among Trump supporters. Also, many members of the QAnon movement were part of this violent and illegal protest. In my own country, this is Jaap van Dissel. He is the director of the RIVM, that's the Dutch Health Authority. So he has had a lead role in advising the Dutch government throughout the Corona pandemic about what measures should be taken. He also was targeted by conspiracy theorists. At some point, people started accusing him of ritual and satanic child abuse and child killing of children. So this was, of course, linked with the QAnon movement. Then one of these conspiracy theories even started posting stuff online that he had, repressed memories had surfaced where he personally had been sexually abused by Jaap van Dissel, and this had severe consequences. Jaap van Dissel is getting, up until this day, 24/7 protection by security agencies due to the continuous stream of death threats he receives from conspiracy theorists. So conspiracy theories isn't necessarily the only driver for protest, but it is a good driver, a good predictor of specifically violent forms of protest. This is a study about the Corona pandemic and the extent to which people were willing to follow the rules. Let me explain the design a little bit. So there were over 5,000 participants. Actually, we started in April 2020 with 9,000, but by December 2020, we had another wave of these participants, and about 5,000 of them responded to the questionnaire again. And in April, we measured their belief in Corona conspiracy theories. And then in December, we asked them in a binary format, did you or did you not do that? Now, and I will, for now, focus mostly on the first part, because this part is really about following the rules. So the first were, whether or not they got tested for Corona and whether they tested positive. So more conspiracy beliefs meant a lower likelihood of getting tested for Corona. And if tested, a higher likelihood of the test being positive. So they were more likely to get the virus, apparently. Now, why might that be the case? Actually, so we also asked 3 questions about whether or not they had followed the rules, whether or not they had received a fine for violating the corona measures, whether or not they had received too many visitors in their house than was legally allowed at the time, and whether or not they had visited a party or a bar where it was more crowded than was allowed according to the regulations at the time. And you could see that, well, receiving a fine actually didn't find much. There was a huge confidence interval. This was because there weren't that many people in the sample who had received a fine to begin with. But the other 2 questions, yeah, we could really see that conspiracy beliefs in April 2020 predicted an increased likelihood of violating these rules. So clearly, yeah, conspiracy beliefs is associated with a decreased willingness to follow the rules imposed on them by the government. And yeah, and that makes sense if in light of the notion that this government is seen as this hostile group that you shouldn't trust. Now, as a second part, conspiracy beliefs are associated with deteriorated interpersonal relationships. And as said previously, if your interpersonal relationships deteriorate, that also can make you more sensitive to the call of radical groups who do accept you. This is actually also a well-known finding that feelings of exclusion predict an increased willingness to join radical groups. Let's start with some basics. So it is actually well known that that conspiracy beliefs are associated with personality traits or interpersonal types of behavior that aren't necessarily, how shall I put it, make people, well, nice interaction partners. So it's for instance, associated with self-centeredness. In the beginning of the pandemic, there have been interesting, at least in the Netherlands, I think also elsewhere in the world, where people felt the need to hoard toilet paper because they were worried. In any case, there's been studies suggesting that such self-centeredness, such as hoarding behavior, is actually more common to the extent that people believe conspiracy theories more strongly. Conspiracy theorists are also more interpersonally paranoid. So while conspiracy beliefs are about, conspiracies at a higher level or groups or minority groups, also in their interpersonal life, these are beliefs such as that others are talking about you behind your back or want things from you that you don't want. So that's interpersonal paranoia. There's also quite a few studies suggesting that conspiracy beliefs are associated with increased narcissism. And we all know that, narcissism isn't also a trait that make people particularly appealing as interaction partner in the long run. Now, let's delve into some phenomena more closely. So trust in others. So I already noted that conspiracy beliefs predict increased paranoia. So that's also experimental findings confirm that. So conspiracy beliefs predict decreased trusting behaviors. This was a study using a so-called trust game, this economic game where people, can earn more resources if they trust others and if these others indeed turn out trustworthy. This is a study by a set of studies by our postdoc Juliana Spadaro, who looked at the link between institutional trust, which I think is very closely associated with conspiracy beliefs, and trust in strangers. Now, it's well known that institutional trust and trust in strangers are associated, conspiracy beliefs and interpersonal trust. But she actually showed that it's actually a top-down causal process because institutional trust determines how well people feel protected by institutions, which in turn shapes trust in strangers. Let me explain it by an example. If you have all sorts of conspiracy theories about the police and about the legal system, then you're likely to feel less protected by that legal system. Now, and then imagine that you, want to have your house redecorated and you need to sign contracts. That suddenly is then, how shall I put it? A bit more of a scary enterprise, so to speak, because you feel that if the other person, isn't benevolent, wants to exploit you, you won't be protected by these institutions. So this is how institutional trust, in a top-down manner, shape interpersonal trust. And I think that also will apply to conspiracy theories, although yeah, we still need to investigate specifically for conspiracy theories. But I think this model, yeah, it gives a very strong empirical basis for that prediction. Conspiracy beliefs and exclusion experience. That's the same study I presented earlier with the conspiracy beliefs in April and responses in a binary format in December 2020. But now I will focus on the last 4. So conspiracy beliefs also predict an increased likelihood to have lost your job. Now that's actually a finding where I have to admit that we don't know really what the causal order can be, because it's also well known that people who have less secure jobs are more vulnerable to conspiracy beliefs. So it's of course possible that in April they felt their job was less secure, and then 8 months later they indeed had lost their jobs. But these latter two, they are particularly interesting for this discussion. These questions were: have you been you experience rejection? Did you lose contact? Did others end contact, their contact with you because of your opinion about corona? And the second question: have you ended contact with others due to their opinion on corona? And what we actually found was that high conspiracy beliefs predicted an increased likelihood of having experienced rejection and a decreased likelihood of actually having rejected others. What tells us this? This suggests that actually, society, at least Dutch society, is very intolerant of conspiracy believers. People don't really like to be around conspiracy believers. They tend to, terminate contact with them. And as said, that can make people vulnerable to the lure of more radical groups that can make people more likely to join, for instance, Telegram groups where they are being heard, where people do think that way, and this can really increase that radicalization. So now then the third process, I think this one is particularly key given the link between antagonistic outgroups among both radicalism and conspiracy beliefs. Which is the idea that conspiracy beliefs predict increased conflicts between groups in society. You can see that in the political realm. If you look at the United States and look at Democrats versus Republicans. I should say that on average, a general tendency to believe conspiracy beliefs tends to be higher among Republicans. Still, there's also clearly conspiracy theories about Democrats, mostly about how Republicans are conspiring. So there's a lot of mutual conspiracy theories. Example of a typical Republican conspiracy theory is the birther conspiracy theory, such that President Obama wasn't actually born in the US and should never have been president. A conspiracy theory that's actually bigger among Democrats is the 9/11 truth movement. I believe that the 9/11 terrorist strikes were an inside job of the government. Why is that actually bigger among Democrats? It's because there was a Republican in the White House when it happened. So yeah, conspiracy theories can really be used to blame bad events on other groups. Oshinsky and Parent, they are two political scientists from for election losers, and that was actually a prediction that also was corroborated in 2016 and 2020 election. In the 2016 election, when Trump unexpectedly won, you suddenly saw a huge increase among Democrats in the belief that Trump wasn't playing fair during the elections. And in 2020, when Biden won, we all again know the footage from the storming of Capitol Hill, but you also can really see that in the data. So conspiracy believes that we actually have a study that's now in the revise and resubmit stage, where we actually found that before the election, particularly Biden voters were worried that Trump would rig the election, but it's completely flipped around after the election, and particularly Trump voters thought that the elections were rigged. Now, here are a couple of research findings from the literature. So minority groups that face realistic problems are more likely to endorse conspiracy theories. That's also a manifestation of, perceiving a group that's hostile. There's a dominant majority group, and that's not giving you equal chances and equal opportunities. That's that, and which can be true, and I mean, so discrimination is a real thing, but that also can then give rise to a lot of conspiracy theories, blaming this majority group for a lot of other things that are happening. This was a study from Indonesia, where Indonesian citizens believed conspiracy theories more strongly when the West was described as threatening to Muslims. This study was specifically about terrorist strikes in Indonesia. There are a couple of the bigger terrorist strikes in Indonesia have made it in the Western news, such as the Bali bombings, but there were a lot more smaller ones that didn't really make it into the Western news, but there have been quite a few terrorist strikes there. And when the West was described as threatening to Muslims, like there's this Western anti-Muslim sentiments in the Western world, then people were more likely to believe that these terrorist strikes were actually orchestrated by the Western world. This is actually work by a historian, particularly in the current era. This is actually interesting, I think, that wars are typically accompanied with strong conspiracy theories. So the ultimate manifestation of intergroup conflict goes hand in hand with strong conspiracy theories about the enemy. This is a study about the link with minorities that face discrimination and conspiracy beliefs that we run in the Netherlands. So we had 4 types of conspiracy beliefs. 2 were relevant for a Muslim identity. So Islamic conspiracy theories portrayed Muslims as victims, such as ISIS was actually the work, ISIS actually works together with the United States to make Muslims look bad, was an example. Jewish conspiracy theories were conspiracy theories that portray Jewish people as perpetrator, such as that questions such as the Holocaust was exaggerated to legitimize founding the state of Israel, was an example of an item that we asked. Now you could here see that these conspiracy theories were much bigger among Muslims than among non-Muslims. What I think most interesting is these 2, because these are conspiracy theories that have nothing to do with Muslim identity, such as the economic crisis of 2008. Was that the work of deliberate work of bankers? You could also see that it was higher among Muslims, and also other conspiracy theories such as basic stuff like the moon landings being filmed in a TV studio. You could also see that being higher. Now, why was that the case? Did it have anything to do with the content of religion? Actually, no. We also looked at minority status more generally, and also, you could also find this among ethnic minorities who weren't Muslim. What appeared to be driving this was feelings of discrimination, the feeling that you're not getting equal opportunities in society, both at the individual and at the group level. This is what discrimination does to people. It makes people suspicious of the society that they're living in, and of the group that isn't giving them equal chances. So this is what discrimination does to people. At a geopolitical level, you could also see these conspiracy theories blaming other groups. This is Trump blaming China for the pandemic. He continuously called the virus that causes COVID-19 a Chinese virus. Interesting was that this was actually mutual. In China, there were a lot of conspiracy theories blaming the United States for the pandemic. There's also in China a very well-known lab leak theory that in Fort Detrick that the virus was created and leaked and then brought to China. And Zhao Lian is a well-ranked Chinese diplomat who has publicly proclaimed this actually. So there's a lot of mutual conspiracy beliefs that I think underscore this role of us versus them thinking of intergroup conflict in conspiracy beliefs. This is a study that I ran together with one of my Chinese students, and we ran this partly in the United States and partly in China. And we did it before the corona pandemic, actually. This was more in the context of the US-China trade war that was taking place at the time. Among United States participants, we asked questions accusing China of conspiring. So the secret agency of China has been trying to influence political decision-making in America. That was an example item. And in China, for those who can't read Chinese, this says the secret agency of America has been trying to influence political decision-making in China. Now, what were the main results? First, the result was actually interesting. When I asked in live audiences, where do you think these are higher? About 70 to 80% raises their hand and says they believe it's going to be higher in the United States. And I also thought that before we ran it, but my Chinese student instantly said, no, this is going to be way higher in China. Trust me, this is, and she was right. It really was actually a lot higher in China. It was actually on a 7-point scale, about 1 point, so to speak. So that was a big effect size, but more interesting was why that was the case. There were, China has a couple of cultural differences with the United States, such as higher power distance values and stronger vertical collectivism. And these are all cultural dimensions that make people more oriented towards a group, that makes it more normative for people to sacrifice their own self-interest and in favor of the group interest. Now, when you're focused more on the group, you're also more likely to be concerned when other groups are threatening your group, right? And that manifests itself both in higher in-group favoritism and also a stronger belief that a stronger concern that this outgroup poses a threat to their country. So higher levels of collective narcissism as indicator of in-group favoritism. And also a stronger belief that this other group is threatening. So here is our more specific findings. You see these cultural dimensions, but for this discussion, particularly this part is, I think, interesting. These are both, I think, clear indicators of intergroup conflict. So what's happening here is, why do Chinese believe these conspiracy theories more? It's because they're more group oriented and therefore perceive higher conflicts than vice versa. This was a study on intergroup bias in vaccination hesitancy and conspiracy beliefs. So this was actually just a scenario study, a vignette, where among United States participants, we told, okay, imagine the following. There's this new vaccine. It's completely safe against COVID-19. It's completely safe. It's been tested. It's been approved. And if you want, we could give it to you tomorrow. Would you or would you not take it? And then we varied. Half the participants were told this actually was a vaccine that was manufactured in China by Chinese scientists, and other half we told them it was manufactured in the United States by United States scientists. Now here you could clearly see that these United States participants were more likely to take the vaccine if it was manufactured by United States scientists, and were less likely to believe conspiracy theories about the vaccine, such as that the vaccine had been tampered with. Now, these were findings we thought was interesting, but when we saw them, we instantly started to, with the help of one of my PhD students, translate these materials into Chinese, and then ran the same materials in China. And there we found this. There actually, the Chinese people were far more likely to take the Chinese vaccine, and also they were more likely to believe conspiracy theories when the vaccine was made by United States scientists. So here you can again see this process of intergroup conflict happening. So conspiracy beliefs make us less trustful about the actions of other groups, make us more likely to believe that what this other group is doing isn't right, and makes us therefore, in this case, more hesitant to take the vaccine manufactured by this other group, even though we told participants it had been tested, independently tested and approved. This is actually a study that's actually new. We haven't really published this yet, but I thought I'd briefly share it with you. We also looked at separately vaccinated and unvaccinated people and how polarized they were. What we actually found was very interesting. We found that both vaccinated and unvaccinated people during the last part of the corona pandemic were polarized, but they were polarized in different ways. So people who were vaccinated, people who were unvaccinated were mostly polarized towards the government. And that was heavily driven by conspiracy theories and also by other factors, such as the belief that they were being coerced into vaccination. People who were vaccinated were actually also polarized, but not towards the government. They were mostly polarized towards people who were unvaccinated. So they were really angry about that. And interestingly, also among vaccinated people, this was driven by conspiracy beliefs, but then in a reverse manner. So the more they thought these conspiracy theories were implausible, the angrier they were with unvaccinated people, actually. So I thought it was interesting to share. But I think this also shows that this polarization can be linked with conspiracy theories, particularly among unvaccinated people in this case. Now, then the fourth process, like I said, political polarization, conspiracy theories make opinions more rigid, make opinions more radical. We can, for instance, there's various manifestations of political polarization. One of them is populism. That's this belief that the society is divided in good citizens versus corrupt elites. Now, actually, I think at the basis of almost by definition, populism should be related with conspiracy thinking. You could indeed see a lot of conspiracy theories in populist movements. Think of the Brexit movement. One of the main predictors of Brexit was the belief that the referendum would be rigged. Also, Trump, of course, during his election campaign had major conspiracy theories. This is a study that we ran in 13 European Union countries. And we found that conspiracy beliefs was positively correlated with populist attitudes in all 13 countries, although the effect size really varied, which puzzled us a little bit. It was really weak, particularly in Romania, but also a few other Eastern European countries, such as Hungary and Poland. It wasn't that big. Whereas in, for instance, Sweden, but also Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium, it was actually very strong. We suspect this may be a cultural difference in terms of basic institutional trust, which may be a bit lower in Eastern European countries, and therefore also fueling a lot of conspiracy beliefs among people who aren't necessarily populist. Well, we actually found that populist attitudes aren't only associated with conspiracy beliefs. So actually, people who are members of populist movements typically seem to think they're critical citizens. We actually found evidence for the contrary. We actually find that populism is associated with gullibility. So this was the same study as the one in the 13 EU countries. So we've actually found that populist attitudes are associated with conspiracy beliefs, but they also find mainstream news more credible, alternative more credible. They also believe more strongly in, that's a scale that's called bullshit receptivity. That means that people get nonsense statements and then are asked whether or not they see some deeper meaning in it, and also are more likely to believe in the paranormal. So that's, our conclusion was that actually populist attitudes are more generally rooted in this, this gullible mindset. So that accepts not only conspiracy theories, but also a lot of other information as true. This is also, I think, part of a more polarized political beliefs, that when people get more rigid in their beliefs, they also get more less democratic. And this is a common idea that conspiracy beliefs are less democratic. Is that true? We actually find that, yes, partly, but it's also a bit more complicated than that. So yes, it's true in the sense that conspiracy beliefs predict rejection of the current system of representative democracy. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're always less democratic. It also actually predicts increased support for direct democracy. So for instance, populist movements love referenda, right? So in that sense, not necessarily, but it also predicts increased support for autocratic forms of governance. Now, we have been a bit puzzled by these findings, but what we believe explains it, that conspiracy beliefs make people believe that the system itself is rotten to its core, and that they perceive anything else as better than the current democratic system, including these democratic and undemocratic alternatives. So I think that's also part of these polarized political beliefs, a rejection of the current system of representative democracy and a preference for radical change in any direction. These are studies among extremism. So these were earlier studies that we published, mostly data collected from the Netherlands. And we found this curvilinear effect, that conspiracy beliefs are stronger at the left and right extreme than in the middle. By and large, it seems to be a bit stronger at the far right than at the far left, I would say. But yeah, I think here we again see support for that idea of political polarization being related to conspiracy beliefs. This finding raised quite a bit of discussion, because in other countries, not everyone was able to replicate it. For instance, in the United States, it actually more clearly seems to be a right-wing thing. Something of the Republican Party. Now, you can interpret that in various ways. You could say the Republican Party is a more right-wing party. You can also say it's actually a more radical party. So it's a bit, tricky how to interpret that. So we did with a huge group of authors, a huge multi-nation study in 26 nations and more than 100,000 participants. And these are the results. So testing whether or not it's more a right-wing thing or more a curvilinear thing. And these were the findings for the curvilinear pattern across countries. So you can really see it's mostly in many countries a curvilinear thing. Interestingly enough, we also found support for the notion that it's stronger at the far right. So it's a curvilinear, but not symmetrically so. It's really stronger at the far right than at the far left, but also stronger at the far left than in the center. What's also interesting to note is that we also looked at various types of right-wing orientation. That also mattered. So you have, for instance, you can be economically right-wing, so that's free market thinking, and you can also be socially and culturally right-wing, so like in terms of rejection of immigrants, for instance. And we found that it was actually specific. The link with right-wing orientation was actually specific for being socially and culturally right-wing, so for rejection of immigrants. And it's actually unrelated to being economically left or right-wing. Now, conclusions. So conspiracy beliefs and extremism that are intrinsically related. So I started my talk noting that conspiracy theories seem to facilitate the process of radicalization. I think conspiracy beliefs seem to really come before radicalization, because I said earlier, not all conspiracy theories are extremists, but most extremists are conspiracy theorists. I think that at least 4 processes help to explain that link to that path from conspiracy theories to radicalization. So conspiracy theories make people less likely to adhere to rules and regulations. Why would you adhere to rules and regulations imposed to you by a government that's corrupt, right? Conspiracy theories also deteriorate interpersonal relationships, and if your interpersonal relationships deteriorate, it makes you more vulnerable to joining radical groups and joining radical fora. Conspiracy theories increase conflict between groups, and seeing other groups as hostile and as dangerous and part of conflict. That also is, I think, a core part of radicalization. And conspiracy theories predict political polarization. It makes people's political opinions more rigid, more polarized, and so forth. So with that, I am at the end of my talk. I'm also looking at my clock. It's exactly 1 hour. So, and I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to discussing these issues with you. So thank you so much.